Hello, good evening. Welcome to today's edition of Tisky Sound. My name's Aaron Bastani. This evening we have the immense pleasure of being joined by two big figures, it's fair to say, both literally but also figuratively. On the Labour left, Jon Trickett and Ian Lavery. How you doing, chaps?
Very nice.
Good, Aaron, good.
We had you on just after the election, didn't we?
Yep. Things haven't changed much since then. But it'll be interesting tonight because, the Northern Discomfort issue is a document which John and I put together way before the election.
Yeah.
And a lot of the detail in the document has actually come true, at the election and following the election. So it's interesting that we had it probably 6 months before the election, and to see the content, the detail, and the projections and the predictions, it's quite frankly amazing. But can I just say something, Aaron? Can I just say something about the fabulous Ash Sarkar?
Oh, go on.
I think it's important that people express their solidarity to Ash because I like Twitter, and the abuse that wonderful individual gets from people on Twitter and on Facebook and on these social platforms is absolutely appalling. I've met Ash. I like her very much. She's very clever. She's a bubbly character. She's there for the cause. And I just place on record my solidarity to such a wonderful character. And I think it's important that others should do the same.
Yeah, Twitter's a weird kind of space, as we all know and probably feel wounded by sometimes, but she's had it as bad as anybody. And, it's impossible to avoid the conclusion that we get it because we're on the left, but she gets it because she's on the left, because she's a woman, and because she's a person of colour. The three things together seem to wind up these people on the Twitter sphere, and it's disgraceful what's happened. But she looks like a tough character. You know better than I do anyway. And we have to express solidarity with her and hope that she can see these swines off, really.
No, she is tough, but at the end of the day, the problem with tough characters is often they can take more than other people, and then they take too much, and what is a strength becomes a weakness because you think you can take everything. And what she's been subject to, like you've so kindly expressed solidarity with, is obviously ridiculous. And I agree with the diagnosis of it. It's because she's a woman, she's left wing, and she's a woman of colour.
Yeah, exactly.
The
three things together,
and it's just terrible.
But Ian's right. I mean, we'd begun to write about basically working class communities, and because we're both from the north, you might gather from our accents, we were very interested in what was happening in working class communities in the north, but across the country. So we began to write probably in about March last year. We had the document ready by June.
So this is the Northern Discomfort.
Yeah, the Northern Discomfort
document. Maybe we can get this up. The only place you've talked about this previously is in an article for Tribune, isn't it?
We did. It's online on Tribune, the actual pamphlet.
Yeah.
So it's quite a long pamphlet. You can find it on Tribune. There's an article about it. There's a short one on Labour List, but I don't think it has a link there. And it was clear to us something was going badly wrong. Actually, I'd been writing about working class attenuation to its links with the Labour Party since 2005 when I did the analysis, the millions of people, working class people that stopped voting for us under Blair. And it's been a continuous concern really for us ever since. But we felt as if there was a danger that for the left to engage in a culture war between two sections of working people was kind of completely the wrong track to go down. We thought that they should, rather than a culture war, let's get back to the old idea of the class war. And so we began to write that. It was finished in about June or July, would you say?
Was that?
When did you start? When did you start writing it?
Probably in the spring.
So it's after Labour changed their position on Brexit, which was January, February.
Yeah, it's true. It's true to say that we were particularly, both of us, really quite worked up about where the party was going, and Ian will tell you for himself. In Shadow Cabinet, the pair of us, week after week, were saying, "You continue down this track, and there is no way you can win a general election." And
who are the? This isn't the script, but we'll go with this. Who were the sort of resistant voices to that?
Well, I don't know if anybody resisted it. They just simply continued to persist.
But then somebody has to take responsibility because there's people say, "Oh well, but clearly strategic choices were made or not made right? You get sins of commission, but also omission.
Sure.
So clearly, from what I'm told, is there are other people who right now are quite prominent in the Labour leadership campaign who said we should do this. They were sometimes outriding the sort of agreed position. I think how did that happen? How did these disagreements happen in the shadow cabinet?
And that's how Jon and I got together, really. I mean, I've known Jon for a long time, he's known me for a long time, but not like it's like comrades and friends. But because we on the strategy group, because we were on the shadow cabinet and other meetings together, we read this quite some time ago, that there was this huge move within influential parties within the shadow cabinet to move towards the second referendum. My view was that there could have been a move eventually to again have a look at Article 50 and withdraw Article 50. That was my view at the end of it. So we see this coming it was basically the metropolitan southern representatives on the shadow cabinet who believed that they were under extreme pressure from the Liberal Democrats and quite openly said that we need to move towards a people's vote. We need to move towards stopping Brexit. And that's what people thought, by the way. And that was the huge problem. We were seen as a party that were looking to fudge Brexit, stop Brexit, whatever way we could. And you know what? That's what we were doing in the Commons. And I'm afraid to say that's how we got ourselves into a little bit trouble. But it was at shadow cabinet meetings. I don't want to disclose what happens at shadow cabinet meetings because it's not the right thing to do. But there were people coming in there with pool after pool after pool, heaps of documents saying, you're wrong. We need to move to a more Remain stance. And I was sick to death as a national campaign coordinator saying, I've got to tell you my professional view on this with the data and with the information we have as a party, and that is we cannot, under any circumstances, win an election if we move to be a Remain party. Because we were looking at the conservative marginals and saying we couldn't win the conservative marginals if we went to be a more Remain party, and that was absolutely right, and we were found to be correct, unfortunately, at the election.
I think just to compound your point, there's a parliamentary constituency, Wentworth and Dearne, which is where
we know it,
Cortonwood Colliery was, beginning of the miners' strike, which is pertinent because that was basically, that happened around this time of the year in 1984. And if you look at the general election result for there, John Healey, Labour's John Healey, he won the seat, but he's won it by, I think, 2,200 votes. And the combined Tory and Brexit Party vote is about 6,000, 5,000 more than the Labour vote.
Yeah.
So if the Brexit Party had stood down in that seat like they had done in the Tory seats, Labour would have lost that seat, and Labour nationally would have gone to around 150 seats. And so you hear the sort of counter-argument, well, there was this progressive vote Labour didn't tap into. The Lib Dems only got 1,700 votes. There's nothing else there. So, do you buy the argument? It's the counter-argument. I'll make it quickly because we want to talk about the report. The counter-argument is Labour dithered, and either they did what Ian just outlined, which is stick to that position, or if they went to a second referendum, they should have done it earlier. They should have done it with more kind of certainty. Somebody like a Paul Mason would say that would have won more seats.
Well, there's no evidence at all. Look, unfortunately, we got mired. I remember there was a Brexit subcommittee, the shadow cabinet meeting, week after week after week. We got mired in the details of the numbers, really. But the truth is, all of the seats we needed to win to form a majority, almost all of them Tory seats with Leave majorities. The seats which were the most marginal for the Labour Party were Labour seats with Leave majorities, and we were told we didn't understand our own seats.
Who was telling you that?
We were told by senior members of the shadow cabinet, some of whom aspire to great positions in life. Between us, we've got probably, I don't know how many years in the Labour movement between us, probably nearly a century, working in the north of England, in working class communities, don't tell us we don't know what's happening in the area. When we did, and the regrettably, nobody wants to say, I told you so, but the fact is, our document predicted there were 50 seats, Labour seats, which were in trouble if we continued down the track that we went down, and we lost 49 out of those 50 seats. Of all the seats we lost in the general election, only 2 of them were Remain seats in the south. The rest were in the north and the Midlands. And it breaks my heart to say that we told our comrades week after week after week what they were doing, but they continued to press forward into a position which was unsustainable in a general election. Now, the counter-argument is, well, if you'd have gone for Remain, you might have won more seats. There isn't a shred of evidence.
No,
not a single shred of evidence.
The useful thing with counterfactuals is you don't need any evidence.
No,
do you?
And the thing about it also is that we now can see with hindsight, which, as we know, is a wonderful thing. We were right, and we predicted disaster. Our document, which we're going to come to shortly, spells out exactly what the processes were, because underlying all this were cultural differences. Now, I come from a working class family, I represent a northern mining seat, but I know that I can't get a majority unless we can persuade North London and those other seats, the big university towns, to vote Labour as well. And so therefore it requires a degree of understanding between the different components of the Labour coalition, but there was no understanding. There was a tin ear turned to our community.
Let me ask you a question both quickly. Do you think that Remain voters are less understanding than Leave voters? Because obviously there's sort of cliches, graduate education, people are more tolerant of opposing views, but actually there's quite a lot of data to suggest that's not true.
Well, people were telling me in North London, they were describing the North in quite revolting terms about we were the peasants up there who didn't understand the modern world. But of course, it requires an attempt by both sides in a dispute to understand each other.
Do you think that the sort of London Remainy base of the party was worse at that than the other side? More tin-eared, as you said.
It's tin-eared. And remember, here's the thing which we do want to talk about this evening is, where are the bulk of the members of the Labour Party actually living? What's the sort of demography of its membership? And does that, in a way, determine the direction of the Labour Party? But no, I didn't find that the Remainers were any more tolerant. I felt that they were less tolerant to us. They failed to understand our position.
Well, I think that's right. And I don't want to start a war again with Remain and Leave voters. But the reality is, I was and Jon was there as well, at lots of meetings with senior parliamentary figures there. And let me tell you, the view among some people was that the reason that the people up north, that's the saying, up north, in fact, some people say it up north, they were saying that the reason that people up north had voted Leave was purely on a racist context, and that was that was absolutely horrendous. Somebody like me, somebody like Jon, who fought racism, fought bullying, fought harassment, intimidation in any forms that it might come in all our lives. For senior people to suggest that was happening in my community, for example, my community was absolutely atrocious. But I think, to be fair, there was some really nastiness, vitriolic bitterness between both sides. And, at the end of the day, Brexit might eventually be the catalyst to the demise of the Labour Party as we knew it.
Right, on that note, I just want to quickly say as well, people forget 1975, Labour members overwhelmingly wanted to reject the referendum. They were sort of...
The left.
But it went to conference, didn't it? And conference overwhelmingly didn't want to be in the European Union. Nobody said they were all racist then.
Yeah, I was active in that campaign back in the referendum against the common market as it then was.
Yeah.
I was still at school, just for the record.
So the title of the paper, which is on the Tribune article, Northern Discomfort, is named after a paper report from the Fabian Society called Southern Discomfort, which was published in 1992. That's where you sort of locate a lot of these problems stemming from in terms of a change in Labour's political strategy. Yeah. I'm going to quote what you write. I can pull this up. In 1992, following Labour's fourth straight defeat, North Durham MP Giles Radici published a report for the Fabian Society called Southern Discomfort. He advocated a break with our traditions of solidarity and pursuit of Southern voters and a new Labour Party focusing on a narrow definition of what he called, quote, aspiration. This new Labour view of aspiration was too individualistic, top-down, hierarchical and based on competition. It focused on one outcome, to make everyone middle class. It became the blueprint for the hugely successful Blairite political project. But it was flawed. To imagine that aspiration is purely about success in terms of personal progress or to associate it with a new demographic of Middle England was to misunderstand the nature of hope for a better life. Aspiration doesn't belong to a single group of voters. Given that aspirational socialism has been one of the signature bits of rhetoric from Rebecca Long-Bailey's leadership bid, do you think that's a bad idea? Should Labour just give up on aspiration, or are you trying to say something a bit more nuanced there, John?
Well, here's a thing, really. Aspiration in the original pamphlet, we've taken it, it's called Southern Discomfort, and it's the argument that Labour's got a problem in the south. We can assume all those working class peasants up north are always going to vote Labour, so let's work on these aspirational people down south. Is then used to advocate a rupture between Labour as it had been and what Blairism then became. But the idea that aspiration, that some people don't have aspiration, I totally reject. Look, I think it's ridiculous. A child born today, my constituency, their mum and dad will have the same hopes as anybody else, but the horizons are limited. And when we talk about aspirational socialism, it's the task of society and the wider community to make sure that all our hopes and dreams come true. All of our hopes and dreams, not just the wealthy few, or those people who live in a certain part of England.
But is that aspiration?
It's our hopes and dreams. It's our expectations of a better life.
I think people were like crying out for a sense of collective purpose and mission. Yeah, is that aspiration? I mean, that's what Brexit was.
Let me give you an example. Come in. To have a proper job, where you know what your hours are, where you know what your rate of pay is going to be, where it's going to be satisfying, there's a chance of promotion if you work hard. That's an aspiration, but it's a collective thing. To have a home where you can live, and it's warm and it's comfortable and it's yours, and it's a space which you own or rent, and it's where your family or your household, the people you love, share with you. That's something which you hope for. That's an aspiration, but the trouble is, for too many people in our society, it's an aspiration which is not being delivered. The same with a proper job. So, yeah, these are hopes and aspirations, but they can't be delivered in the classic neoliberal way which has been offered by our society. It has to be done in a collective way. So building council houses and the change in the housing market, that's what this is all about, in my opinion.
So it goes on to say, when I come to it in a sec, it goes on to say, in the end, this new Labour political orientation, which is the whole post-92 aspirational, thing, delivered a lot of progress, but it came at a huge cost. I mean, I would say, here's the thing, this is the reckoning that people on the left now have to have. Did it create a lot of progress? We need to have an honest assessment about New Labour. The housing market in 2010 was much worse than it was in 1997. Sure, pensioner poverty was much lower. Child poverty much lower. I'm not saying New Labour didn't do some great things, but I see, for instance, Rosina Allen-Khan, you obviously can't criticise her, she's a colleague, but I see her on the sort of podium with her shtick for deputy leader saying, I would be nothing without Tony Blair. And I'm thinking, you're a doctor. Well, Tony, she's around about my age, a little bit older. What did Tony Blair do for you? Fees are increased. It's harder to buy a house in London. I don't understand how New Labour transformed your life. And there's this thing I keep on hearing from Labour politicians going, New Labour was transformational, Blairism was transformational. You say here it delivered a lot of progress, but it came at a huge cost. I suppose the question is, for places that voted Leave, for places that just didn't vote Labour, maybe it didn't actually bring a lot of progress. Maybe that's the problem.
Well, if you look at the votes that we lost, I think, 5 million votes between 1997 and 2010.
Yep.
That's huge, mind. And that's how this issue, it isn't just because of communism in 2019 that we've lost 4 elections. And we lost 5 million voters since 1997. I think, Tony Blair, we've done a lot of good things as a Labour Party. I wouldn't suggest that we were transformational in any way, shape or form. We could have been and we should have been. But this document, Northern Discomfort, it isn't a document which wants to dampen down aspiration, hope, vision, dreams. Quite the opposite. What we're saying, Aaron, is that we believe that people throughout this country should be able to have these. Why should you not have hope, vision, aspiration, dreams if you live in a community like mine? But it's all right to have them in other parts of the country, in particular being metropolitan areas. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're looking at the disparities between the north. Sorry, it's not just the north, but it's the south and the rest of the country.
Well, it's southeast even, isn't it?
It is. The south, basically. The southeast, south.
Trouble.
There's problems everywhere, by the way. You know, we understand.
No,
we know there's clusters, for example. There's clusters of poverty in London, huge issues. There's clusters of poverty and unemployment right across the south. But it's not about this. It's the difference between London, the southeast in particular, and the rest of the country.
You've got child poverty is at its highest in places in London. You've got Newham, 50%, Islington, etc. I understand that. But do you not think it's easier if you've got your housing sorted, which many people do, many people don't. But if you've got housing benefits sorted, or if you own a house outright, life's pretty easy in London. I mean, you've got public transport which is affordable. It works. You've got free cultural stuff you can do with the kids. You can find work. Whereas you go to so many parts of the country, some of the places near where you represent, or you can go west. You can go to Portsmouth. You can go to so many places, and it looks like a totally different country. Yeah. So is that true to say that the poverty in London is the same as poverty in the Northeast? It's very different, isn't it?
There's different types of poverty. But let me tell you, 4.1 million kids in poverty in the sixth richest economy in the world is an absolute disgrace. An absolute disgrace. 1.9 million pensioners in the sixth richest economy on the planet is an absolute disgrace. So poverty is poverty, but it does come in different forms. But you mentioned housing. Housing should be a basic human right, a decent house, a roof over your head for yourself and your families. Having a decent property to live in, to keep yourself warm, to keep your family warm, shouldn't be anybody's vision. It shouldn't be aspirational. It shouldn't be a dream. It shouldn't be a hope. You should have it. And once you have those types of things, housing, decent job, decent welfare state, good medical care, a good education, and you build upon that. These are basic rights, and we've lost sight of all of this, by the way. We've lost sight big style on what we should have naturally as a rich country compared to what people perhaps see as an aspiration and a vision.
We're going to pull up some charts now, if that's all right, Fox, just building on the points you guys just said. And this is in the report, growth in all jobs and professional jobs by region since 2012.
Yep.
And as you can see, obviously, huge growth for London.
Yep.
And the lowest is Wales, the North East, Scotland, East Midlands, East. West Midlands surprisingly high, I guess, just basically level with the South East. But basically that sort of compounds what you're saying there about all the jobs being created in London and the South East. Then if we go to the next chart, which is really interesting, which talks about the percentage of people aged 25 to 60 that moved away from their childhood region. You've got 38% of people who work in professional jobs have left their home region.
Yeah.
So that's people that would have been in Bolsover, Barnsley.
Yeah. Wakefield.
And Wakefield. Yeah. So these would have been, generally speaking, university educated. Yeah. They are now Labour's new base, under 45s with university educations. Those people are still voting. Those people born in those areas are still voting Labour. The problem is they're not staying there necessarily because work is elsewhere. So politically, and this is something that Owen Jones, by the way, really raised very succinctly on a recent podcast with James Butler, we get that. But politically, because we have first past the post, if you've got young people who want to vote Labour leaving those towns, going to Manchester, going to Leeds, or in the valleys, going to Cardiff, how do you respond with first past the post? Because it doesn't help if we've got 30, 40,000 majorities in big cities, but then we're losing towns.
I'm interested in the debate about political change, changing political institutions, but large parts of the country, you've got chronic poverty. You've got our children and our young people, the brightest, leaving those regions. And the regions, they call them left behind. I say they weren't left behind. I say they've been held back because they were a red wall. It was a place of resistance to the worst aspects of neoliberalism and capitalism. And it's a disgrace how those areas have been just held back in that way. So this is a cry of anger. We've described elsewhere a flame of anger burning inside us at what's happened to the communities that me and Ian and so many other people represent, and an anger in the communities which some people say it's racist, and which has been said to us by quite senior members of the party. It's not racist. It's an anger and a cry of desperation and a demand that our people are respected. And by the way, there is no route to a Labour majority of any decent kind of Labour Party if it cannot embrace those very people who feel so insurgent about the way our country's been managed for the last 30 years.
I'm going to come back to this, but you want to say something, Ian?
I do. I mean, this is about disparity within the UK, within Britain. And the Marmot report, which was published 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, 2 weeks, yeah.
You know, what it said, and it showed quite explicitly in great detail, 170-odd pages, which I've read line by line, it explained the differences of health inequality in this country. You know, if you live in the northeast, you're far likely to die 10 to 15 years earlier than if you live in the south.
Yeah.
The wealth in families, 2.6 times more wealth than each family in the south than what there is in the north, in the Midlands.
Yeah.
A huge increase in male suicide rates, complete lack of investment in the regions. You know, that's a report that came out following the Northern Discomfort discussions. And there's lots of other discussion, lots of other detail in the Marmot report, which we've got to get to grips with. We've got you mentioned, is it a different world before? You know, the North, the Midlands, the North, and then the South. It's a different planet, I'm afraid. Then that's the general basis, the theory, the discussion that we want to have with people is how we bring that together, how we unite people, how we give fairness and equality right across the country, not just investment in the city, not just investment in the cities, but we want to see investment in little towns and villages up and down the whole of the country, not just in these big cities where you have got the decision-making process, where you have got the capitalist system running rife with everybody's life. We want to see proper investment in ordinary people, in communities like mine and communities like John's.
I mean, I'm from Bournemouth, and there's a train station in Bournemouth called Folkestone Station. And I think it may not even have disability access even now.
Wow.
It looks like it's been hit by a bomb. You know, nothing's happened there for 50 years. Yeah. And I used to live in Crystal Palace. And you could get the overground to Crystal Palace Station, and you go in this beautiful revived Victorian building, and you feel good. Yeah. It's gorgeous. You go through a beautifully maintained park. And so this thing about poverty and where you live, you know, I think people often focus on the numbers. Whitechapel, there's lots of poor people in Whitechapel. Crossrail's about to build a £600 million, train station there. There's no £600 million train station in Wakefield.
No.
So it's about infrastructure as well as necessary.
It's about investment. Look, I don't think it can be delivered within the existing social and economic system. That's why we're socialists. But look, we haven't come anywhere to set up an argument between ourselves and London or anywhere else. There's poverty in London. We see ourselves as speaking up for people in poverty and people who are held back anywhere in the country. And we believe a movement of those people that are being held back is what the Labour Party should be about. It's in danger of losing that. It's why Ian, my blood brother here, was speaking in apocalyptic terms about the future of the Labour Party. If we allow ourselves just to become a party of the South East and the people of graduates, then I'm afraid we're going to have lost our central purpose, our DNA, and we are not prepared to allow that to happen. Ian and I and comrades up and down the country need to come together to fight for a Labour Party which is rooted in those communities as well as in the big cities and the university towns.
We cannot win an election, Aaron, with just the working class. We need the working class and the middle class as a cohort of voters to ensure that we can win any election. We understand that clearly, but the point that both John and I would make is that we've got to get back to basics with the working class, and we've got to bring it back. Parity is extremely, extremely important. Where Giles Radici said that we had to basically abandon the North because they would vote, and Peter Mandelson.
Maybe we can get this up.
Oh, sorry. Peter Mandelson actually said something very similar.
He did.
You know, when he said that the working class voters have got nowhere else to go.
We've got a nice picture of him there with Emily Maitlis.
But clearly, people do have alternatives to go. And let me say this: if the Labour Party abandons the communities which created the Labour Party and walks away from them, then who are we leaving them to? Who will feed on the back of the resentment and the anger and the feeling of despair that so many communities feel?
Do you think your colleagues in the centre of the party understand that?
I'm not sure if that is fully understood, but it's our case. We've got to make the case because, look, when UKIP was rampant...
Because they think it's implicit within their argument of, well, let's go back to a kind of centrist politician...
I don't know that centrism works in an age of insurgency, which is where we now are.
Well, we're in an age where in Barnsley, in the European elections or the local elections, you were getting independents, the Veterans Party, the sort of National Front style politics, winning council seats.
We see it all the time. And it's not because naturally there's a sort of right-wing kind of core going like the name Blackpool through the Blackpool Rock, is it, in our communities? They created the Labour Party, they created the trade unions, they fought the Titanic struggle in the miners' strike, which both Ian and I he was engaged in, I was a witness and participant in. Look, these people have got a history of fighting for social justice for a century and a half, but just to abandon them, I'll tell you who will feed off them, the bottom feeders, the Tommy Robinson, these people. We cannot walk away from these people, nor somehow smugly in a superior way say, well, they voted for leave, they've got what they deserve. Actually, that is not the way forward for the party, and that's why this Northern Discomfort argument, we're saying that as socialists, we are creating a problem of Northern discomfort for ourselves if we want to ever get back into a majoritarian position, and for God's sake, that is so important in these days.
You're watching Tisky Sa. This is a great show on Novara Media. If you like what you're watching, I want you to do just one thing. We've got 900 people watching, 915 people watching. We'll get it to 1,000 shortly, I'm sure. It goes up throughout the show. I want you to just hit the like button. Smash the like button. Only got 248 likes, 915 watching. Doesn't cost you a thing. As free as manners, as my mum would say. Much appreciated. Of course, if you have already smashed the like button, which I'm sure you have, if you're a smart political person like these guys here, then why not hit the subscribe button? Or even better, go to support.novaramedia.com, help us build a new media for different politics. The thing you were saying about how we can't leave them behind, I've seen, and you talk about, in the rest of the report, you talk about, for instance, the community organising team,
sure,
which was set up, 2 years ago?
Sure.
My view of community organising is whoever oversees it, whatever party, whatever country, to see the real fruits, it's going to take 5, 10, 15 years anyway.
Of course.
But the response of some of your colleagues, for instance, Lisa Nandy's attacked it in the press and so on. As I understand it, people have been told to not attack party staff, etc., during the leadership campaign. Keir Starmer's done that, to be fair to him, admirably, as has Rebecca Long-Bailey. When you've got colleagues attacking the community organising unit, given what's just happened, given, like you say, and this is objective fact, the membership is increasingly middle class and based in the southeast. Yeah. Do you think that your colleagues or people in and around, and Lisa Nandy's not the Labour establishment, but people in and around the Labour establishment, people that may be donating money to Labour who presently aren't, do you feel like they kind of basically still think what Peter Mandelson thinks, which is they've got nowhere else to go, when actually they've just voted for the first time in 100 years for the Tory party? Is there a sort of a sense of denial? Because Keir Starmer can't win a majority without these exact same places. He can't ignore the things you guys are talking about. And yet it seems a very marginal part of the conversation right now within the Labour Party.
Well, I think the fact that we published it just recently, we should have done it last summer, but it wasn't possible, shows that we think this is still relevant. It was written in the summer before the election, that devastating experience. We still think it's relevant. In fact, it's more relevant now than it was then, because look what happened. and it was avoidable. It was clearly avoidable had we taken other decisions, but we are where we are now. Look, whoever becomes leader, personally I hope Becky becomes leader because she understands the North and she is a working class lass from the north of England. But whoever becomes leader will have to wrestle with the central problem is where are the Labour seats going to come from? And what is a demographic group that we're after? If we think it's just younger people with university degrees or large in cities, let me tell you this, the maths do not add up. And in any event, it's a betrayal of what Labour is. Labour is a party which seeks to unite what we used to call workers by hand or by brain. But above all, its central DNA, as I said earlier, is about social justice. It's about a better world and taking everybody together with us and not just the wealthier few. Now, we cannot lose who we are. And Ian and I and comrades maybe watching hopefully tonight will see that as a central purpose. Can I just say, though, while I'm just speaking, how important it is that you've created this environment here, because we haven't managed to get on the so-called mainstream media to make these arguments, Ian. I don't think we have we?
I would prefer to come here in any event.
That's very kind of you. I think
Eric, can I just say it? We cannot win an election without community organising. It was an absolute disgrace, the attack that the community organisers were under. It was a concerted, organised attack against the community organising team at Southside shortly after the election and right up till this current day. The community organiser team is a great idea. It's the only way we can get back into these communities who have been deliberately left behind by deliberate political and economic decisions. And we've got to have people, we've got to have community organising in these regions. What people really didn't understand, we only had 28. We only had 28 community organisers. We had every MP saying, well, where was our community organiser? Well, quite frankly, I wish and I hope in the future we'll have a community organiser in every community. But we've just started this project about 18 months ago. And let me tell you, I've never met a community organiser who wasn't the most fantastically dedicated, passionate individual about the party, about the success of the party, and who wasn't prepared to get out there night and day, 7 days a week, to try and make sure that we won the election in 2019. They took up the campaigns in certain areas, like transport, like bus links, like education, poor schools, like the closure of factories, the closure of decent working place. These people were fantastic in bringing communities together in a common cause under the Labour banner. Now, it was essential. And as you said before, this sort of thing takes years so you can have a demonstrable sort of analysis. But the critique on community organising has been unfair. It's been an attack from certain individuals. I'll tell you, we cannot win an election without building the community organising team and having lots more than 28 community organisers on the field. How else, what better to win back a community than having somebody in that community speaking to people, building a team up there, giving them that trust that they want, giving them respect that they need, and turning that into a political advantage for the party.
Jordan, what worries me is that I see it sort of being criticised by the right of the party. They don't even know what it is. The same thing happened with Arnie Graf when Ed Miliband brought him over ahead of 2015, community organiser from the US. It was briefed to the Sun, I believe, that he didn't have the right work documentation.
Yeah, that's true.
And then you think, so this is not just even a Corbyn thing. This is just about a certain kind of politics. We don't want that. That's not welcome in the Labour Party.
Well, look, I think this goes right to the heart of what we are. And I think, look, at the beginning of the Labour movement, there were contending ideas about how we should structure ourselves. We ended up with a Fabian structure. It's top-down, hierarchy, command and control. And people think that's how you win elections. But we're not. It's not like we're building an army to fight a war. This is about changing a country in the most dramatic way possible. But as well as that top-down command and control culture, there was also the Guild Socialist movement, there was the shop stewards movement, there were ethical socialists, there were, people building socialist Sunday schools, and lots of other things was going on. All of that gradually was crushed away deliberately. Now, I've always said, that we cannot succeed in a 21st century age, which is horizontal and networked in character, with a 19th century political structure. I mean, hierarchies in a horizontal world, they don't work. I remember when we were told under Ed Miliband, though it wasn't Ed, but it was the people who got rid of Annie Graf, who said, we instruct you to make 5 million conversations between now and the election. They weren't conversations, they were sales calls. People were watching telly or whatever, they weren't conversations. It wasn't about building relationships. It wasn't about winning confidence or leading communities. It was a top-down kind of salesman or salesperson's call. It don't work. That does not work anymore. So we got to understand, if we're going to tackle labourism, old top-down labourism, that we've got to do things differently. And so the philosophy underlying the community organisers, it works with the zeitgeist, 21st century zeitgeist, and it probably says from the beginning we should have trusted the shop stewards movement and the Guild Socialists and all those people that were crushed away, the Marxists and the others that were in the party, the Christian Socialists. None of them wanted that top-down approach.
So we've got a quote here from the report. We're going to move slightly on now to the composition of the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Ooh.
It is astounding that in 2017, only 4 Labour MPs came from a manual work background, whereas 129 came from professional political backgrounds. The truth is that as politics became more of a career, politicians have become increasingly drawn from small, closed, socioeconomic circles. Decreasing numbers of Labour MPs represented the communities into which they had been born. I agree with all that, obviously. But then I suppose the counter-argument from one of your, critics in the Labour Party would be, well, Jeremy Corbyn was a career politician. What jobs did Jeremy Corbyn have outside of politics? So if he's the Labour leader, surely it's about the content of one's politics and what you believe and the policies you want, rather than where they come from. I mean, you wouldn't want, for instance, 50 more MPs who came from manual jobs,
like me and him,
but had right-wing politics.
No, well, it's interesting. I had this conversation a long time ago with Len McCluskey. I said we need more working-class people in Parliament. He said we need more socialist working-class people in Parliament. And that's true, but look, here's the thing. At one time, there were 50 minors. Labour MPs, it was 49, I think it was, or 50.
When was that?
And it was back in the 45.
Right.
And the point is this, there may have been right or left, but there is no way Attlee could not have nationalised the industries, and they couldn't have built council houses, because those working class socialists, Labour MPs would have insisted, okay, we'll vote for you, Clem, but you have to do something for the communities where you come from. Nowadays, I don't know how many Labour MPs actually ever lived in a council house. So I think it does matter. And it does matter about right and left, but it also matters about class.
Sadiq Khan would say he was raised in a council house. The point is, I've lived in a council house. Yeah. I had to pay £600 a month for pleasure.
It's not an ideological test, but it's just illustrating a point.
I mean, it's about class. This is simply about class.
But I'm just trying to say the critics, your critics, sorry, but this, I'm going to preempt the point, which is your critics would say, well, you don't understand the change. I agree with you, by the way. Yeah. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Of course.
You don't understand the changed nature of class. They would say that all these parliamentary assistants and so on, or third sector, NGO types, that's the new working class. Or they're part of a new working class.
Well, I mean, I've heard this a million times. And you know the difference between left and right and working class and middle class. You can look at it till the cows come home, and you can have different views and different ideas and all this. But if you have a look at the working class communities, as we call them, by the way, they're not all raving left loonies, mate.
No, not at all.
They're really not. So the question is, should we be looking at working class MPs, or should we be looking at lefty MPs? But the reality is, we've got to make sure that the people in the communities, the Labour Party members, have got the right to select who they want.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that in areas throughout the country, ordinary branch members, CLP members, have the opportunity of selecting their MP. Their MP could be somebody who, in their eyes, was working class. Might be an accountant, might be a solicitor, might be somebody who worked at the local factory. What I would look for an MP is somebody who had the politics, somebody who's had a track record in the community, somebody who's proven, somebody who's actually delivered for people in the community with the right type of politics. So it's not as easy as saying right and left, middle class and working class, because it's a whole mixture. Yeah. We cannot win an election unless we've got the cohort of middle class and working class voters.
Yeah. Two things. So put your questions, by the way, on the hashtag TiskiSal or in the comments with a rocket emoji. We're going to take them in 5-10 minutes. Two things. So firstly, I mean, that's already started to happen. I noticed this. I noticed it in particular with the Lewisham-Deptford by-election. Mm-hmm. And you got Janet Dabby's the new MP there. She's not left-wing, but she's from a working class background, black lady. By the way, at the time, Lewisham had 3 MPs. They were all white. It's one of the most BAME areas of London. She ran a food bank, I believe. And that, to me, even though there was the right of the party was backing her, she's kind of the centre of the party. I found it interesting that you now have to have those credentials to basically win a basically have to win, to win a selection. So that's one. So that's good. On the other hand, the argument for people that come out of manual professions, out of the labour movement, and I'm all for it. Like I say, I used to live in Crystal Palace. My MP was a gentleman you probably remember, a guy called Jim Dowd.
Yeah.
Jim Dowd used to be a telecommunications engineer. Yeah. But he had terrible politics. He did bugger all. And so, I mean, again, my worry is, I'd far rather have a lady like Janet Dabby. Like you say, if we're looking at these kind of traditional typologies, I'd far rather, even though I don't agree with she's not on the left necessarily, I'd far rather have her than a Jim Dowd who doesn't really do anything, sits on his arse for 20 years and just goes to Parliament and, has subsidised beer.
The PLP.
Well, listen, you can't get away with that,
I don't know.
Having subsidised beer in the Commons.
Is it not subsidised?
Not that I'm aware. I've never drink in the Commons.
I don't drink alcohol ever, so I have no idea.
It's also everything's subsidised in the Commons, isn't it?
Not that I'm
the
aware.
Wine is.
Is it? How do you know?
There was a big flare about it.
You've got one on me there because I know neither drink beer nor indeed wine, but perhaps you do yourself.
Yes, he's obviously a wine geek. Is this guy? No wonder he's defending the middle class.
I'm a Tisky swear drinker.
But the thing is, look, I mean, I think the PLP, like the Labour Party, it needs to be rooted in every community. But the truth is, if the only politicians from the Labour Party talk as if they're in an Oxford seminar with the same vocabulary, the same clothes, the same inflections of the voice, the same tilt of the head, the same colour suits and ties and so on and so forth, then we're dead, it seems to me, because the cultural gulf between those people who are on the TV and the people who are watching it, who we want to vote Labour, is quite large. But if there's a heterogeneity of voices, and I remember under Blair, look, there was John Reid, there was Mel Molam, Blunkett. There were all sorts of different big John Prescott.
Well, I mean, and I'm not saying and John Reid had
I'm not making any point about it other than I'm not making a left right point here. There was somebody on the front bench that you could probably relate to, and I'm not saying that it's changed in these days, but it's something to be aware of.
They were normal people, is that what you're saying?
It's clear that Blair must have had an eye on the people he was promoting to make sure there was a heterogeneity, and that's the only point that we're making in there. But in the end of the day, look, the point I think it really is your MPs, your councillors and the others, they need to be rooted in the communities. There was too much parachuting in, too many people who sounded as though they were still in an Oxford PPE, seminar and using different vocabulary to, people in the dog and duck down the road.
The sad reality, I think the Tories now, as we sit here, have got more ex-miners as MPs is what the Labour Party has. And I think that just speaks volumes.
Well, they've got, from the new intake, they've got a lot of, you don't want to overrate, you don't want to buy their propaganda, but they've got a lot of people who come from
different backgrounds.
It's true. Lower middle class, backgrounds, not necessarily
to be honest, the reason why we got whacked at the election, and I still haven't recovered from it, and I'm not likely to recover from that disaster at the election. But to be honest, that was a Brexit election. And when you look at the Commons, I'm not going to criticise too many people, But you can see that there is on the opposition, on the government benches, not the opposition benches, on the government benches, you can see lots of people who were, in my view, really, really out of their depth. Yeah. They didn't realise what actually going to be in there. They didn't have any idea that they were going to become MPs. Let's hope. I mean, as I say, I don't want to be personal with anybody, but I think that's a common view within our party. So that's the way it's happened. But it is, isn't it? Isn't it strange that they've got more? The Tory party have got more ex-miners in their ranks.
It's depressing.
Than what we have.
It builds on the whole, like we say, where the miners' strike started, and you've got a combined Brexit Party Tory vote outweighing the Labour one. I'm going to questions. This is from Anna Wakefield, tweets on the hashtag TiskySour. Thank you, Anna. And but don't feel compelled to answer everything, by the way, because I'm not curating these. I don't have foxes. How is it the shadow Brexit secretary has dodged responsibility for the Brexit policy and election loss? So that's Keir Starmer.
Well, I would say that Keir absolutely wanted to remain within the EU. There isn't any doubt about it. I don't think he would hide it himself. In fact, what really worries me is that he said at the hustings in the last couple of days that he would consider campaigning to rejoin the EU, but it wouldn't be a priority of his. That frightens me. That's
crazy, isn't it?
Well, it's hardly going to build the red bricks on the red wall, which was smashed by the Conservatives. But
he's not going to. We're not going to adopt the euro in 2024.
Well,
so why can't he just rule it out? I don't get that.
So the answer to the question is that the media never ever scrutinised the likes of Keir Starmer. They didn't scrutinise him. They supported him. The reality is the majority of the party, the majority of the members within the party, we've got 580,000 members. The majority wanted to remain in the EU. The general public voted against remaining in the EU, and the general public saw what the Labour Party were doing in the Commons. It was killing me day by day to see how we were coming up with amendments, how we were coming up with different issues to try and fight back an eventual Brexit exercise. And I just think that I think the membership, I think the media really wanted to remain in there and let Keir run the show. But
that question, it's gone now, but they basically said, why has he not been called up on it during the process because it hasn't really happened in the leadership race. Nobody's really said, look,
I think it has, mate.
You were the primary architects of this, and nobody's really sort of making it a big thing.
I think it was asked last week when I was watching, I think it was probably the Sky one.
Right, in Brighton.
Yes, I think it was. And it was asked outright. There was a gentleman who called him out on it, and Ali said he denied it. He says when he was on the doorstep, it was a whole number of other issues. That was an issue, but that's not the reason why we lost the election. We've lost four. He says we've lost 4 elections in a row, so we've got to look back. So Keir knew exactly what he was doing. He was the architect of the Brexit decisions the Labour Party took. Of that, there isn't any doubt. He was called out for it. He was called out for it in the Shadow Cabinet. He was called out for it in lots of other meetings. But he was successful enough to drive the party in the direction of remaining.
Your conclusion
and that's why we lost the election.
So your conclusion is basically the members agree with him, so he is being called out, but it doesn't matter because they're probably...
No, we have this debate week after week after week, by the way, and the two of us, plus other comrades from time to time, really resisted there were fierce conversations. But here's what's interesting, because Jeremy, above everything, is Labour Party Democrat. He wants to go with the members. And it was often put to Ian and I, well, look, the members are in favour of remaining. How does anybody know for sure what they really think? But the thing is, the members of the party may have been more Remain. But remember, there are 2 pillars to the Labour Party, and this is what makes our party unique, because we've got organised Labour also inside the Labour Party. My point was this, Jeremy, it's true that the Labour Party members voted for you, but so did the trade unions in tens of thousands. Ordinary trade union members.
They were backing a second referendum as well, though, weren't they?
There's no evidence that the ordinary members were. The ordinary members of the trade unions, it seemed to me, had a different view. And I think, so the Labour Party is made up of two big pillars, isn't it? The membership and then the trade union. There are millions of trade unionists and, hundreds of thousands who pay into the party. They have a different social character and different polyideological character. I bet you a pound to a penny that they would be more for leave than the party members. And you have to be aware, it seemed to me that was a case that we wanted to make to Jeremy. But look, these ideas were contested the most fierce way imaginable inside the shadow cabinet. And I think we probably don't want to go through the details of that, but nobody should be in any doubt that we made that case, and we know exactly who moved when and how the ratchet was moved and how the election was put into jeopardy by those people.
Do No Evil says, you don't get to talk properly like this in mainstream news programming. That's why this is a far better format. Thank you, Do No Evil.
Yeah, very good.
Dougie, is the cultural divide, let's try and and we'll try and wrap up in like 10 minutes. Okay. We started a little bit late. Yeah, so we'll wrap up at 5 past. Dougie, is the cultural divide between the urban and regions real? Cities and regions real? And if it is, then is the Labour Party able to bridge that divide between cosmopolitan cities and so-called working class areas / towns? I mean, that's another sort of sociological argument. It's not. They would say it's not about class. There are different values, open and closed. I think this is a lot of baloney, personally. Yeah. In towns and cities, and that Labour's not really able to bridge that with a kind of classical class offer on public ownership, etc.
Well, I thought Jeremy's most successful speech in the whole of his leadership was made actually just near my constituency in Wakefield. If you haven't looked at it, or if you haven't looked at it for a while, people who are watching this programme might look it up. And what he says, and it's a convincing argument, that in the end, the difference in the country isn't between the towns and the cities, you and people with degrees and those without degrees, or women and men and all the other. The difference is between the 99% and the 1%. And there is an extremely powerful argument to say that what can make our society coherent and give life to our movement is the idea that we're all being held back in one form or another by a system of economic organisation, capitalism, which prevents us living to the full extent of our potential. And that, I think, is where Labour needs to camp out, recognising the differences within working people, the 99%.
But Labour's not going to do that now, are they? Because I read the interview with David Lammy, Weekend FT, and David Lammy's a guy I really respect. We had him on Tiski during the conference last year. Sure. Intelligent, really sharp guy, really good analysis. And he said the British people don't want a revolution. And I thought, what do you think Brexit was? They've just voted for the biggest event in European history, probably since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And you're basically saying, the political strategy has to be sort of just tacking, 0.5% this way, 1% this way. But you're arguing for something quite different.
Well, you can continue putting elastoplast on the wounds, but if
that happens, if that's the path Labour go down of elastoplasts on the wounds, what's going to happen with sticking plasters? Where do you end up? Do you think?
I think we'll end up with some good ameliorative stuff. Except by the way that
can they win? Can they win with that strategy?
It's possible that you could win with a strategy, but whether you would transform people's lives, you wouldn't. And I think I'm not somebody who says that Blair didn't achieve anything. I served for the first 18 months under Blair, but the truth is that it didn't transform our country, and it was easy enough when the Tories came in to wipe away many of the gains that we'd been made. The only way is to be transformative in character, and that requires a different approach to our society. I really hope the Labour Party isn't going to go back to amelioration, to transactional politics, triangulation with the bloody Tories. I hope that we are going to continue to be transformative. Whatever happens, whoever becomes a leader of the shadow cabinet, the one thing is that there's a red thread. It runs right through Labour's history. Sometimes it's a tight thread about to snap because it's so tightly, and then other times that red thread becomes a massive, great red tapestry. And we've gone through one of those moments now, and it isn't over because there are tens of thousands of socialists who together keep that red thread alive, and that is what we'll be doing, whoever becomes the leader, because, transforming our society in favour of social justice is what the Labour Party is really about.
the challenge, John's right, but that's a good question, but I think we have covered like lots of it in the discussion. And you mentioned, for example, a lot of the brighter people who are leaving the towns and the villages, moving into the cities, still voting Labour, by the way, but they're piling votes up in the metropolitan cities. They're still voting Labour, whereby in the, where they were born, we've got more marginals now than we ever had. So I think that's one of the huge challenges, and that's one of the issues we raise in the Northern Discomfort document. But I think it's simple. I think it is about class. I think it's about class solidarity. I think it's about collectivism. I think it's about unity. I think it's about being anti-racist, anti-establishment. It's about social justice and economic justice.
Yeah.
And if we stay by those basic principles, lots of people in communities up and down this country would never classify themselves as socialists, but they would agree with everything I've just said there.
60% of the public identifies as working class. You said
that's right. That's right. Yeah. So what we've got to do is got to build on that. People don't want a revolution. Do you know what? People want a change in life.
Yeah.
People want hope. There's that many people have got absolutely nothing now. And since the election, people try to rewrite the manifesto. And I think the manifesto was brilliant. It might not have been delivered the best possible way, the policies which we had. But you know what? There isn't anybody going to tell me that we should reduce the offer, give a lack of hope, a lack of aspiration, a lack of assistance, a lack of vision to people who are in most need in this country. I'm not buying it, man. I'm not buying it.
The thing as well about people don't want a revolution is walk down a high street. Walk down a high street of most towns, many cities, and again, it looks like a bomb's been dropped on it.
Yeah.
I'm from Bournemouth, and a mate of mine sent me on Facebook a video of Bournemouth in the early 1990s, and you compare it to now, and this is sort of, I presume, just after the recession in the early 90s, but even then, shops open, people out there, families, etc. You go to the high street now, a combination, of course, of the internet, out-of-town shopping centres, etc. But it looks awful. People don't feel like they have a stake in it anymore.
Yeah.
And I just feel like this isn't working. You go to in Portsmouth in Southsea. It was something I'd love to write about. On this one street, it was a whole street called Palmerston Road. It was bombed during the Second World War. So all of a sudden, you've lost all this sense of collective identity. Mm-hmm. Post-war period, it's actually quite nicely done. It looks like a new town. On the same street, you had a John Lewis and you had a Debenhams, and they closed in 6 months of each other. And on just one street, that's about 600 jobs.
Yeah.
And so, but of course you need a revolution. That system isn't working anymore. It's not delivering jobs. It's not delivering living standards. It's a dysfunctional society. And my worry is that the people who now are going to assume leadership of the Labour Party, it's not that they don't have the solutions, because maybe none of us have the solutions. They're not cognizant that's a problem. Is that a fair assessment of, just quickly, each of you?
Well, I
20
think,
seconds.
I think it is fair. Look, I mean, the thing that I find interesting is I did a lot of research into social mobility. The idea that there's a ladder and you can climb up the ladder so that it's a decent, fair society. Well, there's 533 seats in England and Wales. Mine is the 529th most immobile. So a child born in poverty in my seat today will be in poverty when they die, younger than somebody who dies in a more prosperous part of the southeast. That is simply wrong, morally, ethically, economically, and socially. And I think everybody in the country knows it's wrong.
Well, I think that there's many challenges facing whoever is successful in the leadership race and the deputy leadership race, by the way. I think there's many, many challenges. But the most important thing is we've got to close this poverty gap through the whole of the country. I've mentioned 3 or 4 times that we are the 6th richest economy in the world. That means we've got oodles and oodles and oodles of finance, which it's up to politicians how we distribute the wealth which this country creates. And we've got to make sure that constituencies and like the northern constituencies, the constituencies in the northeast, northwest, Yorkshire and Humberside, West Midlands, East Midlands, get their fair share of finances from central government. We've got to close that gap, because if we cannot close that gap, then we haven't got any reason to exist.
Okay. Tom tweets on #TiskiSal. Let's be quick because we want to wrap up in the next couple of minutes. What did Jon and Ian think about Blue Labour? Jon?
Oh, Blue Labour, I think they want to... First of all, look, I am strongly in favour of the idea of strong communities, solidarity, people having a sense of who they are, where they're from, those kind of strong values, which is partly what Blue Labour laments. But the idea we should go back... By the way, I grew up in the 1950s. I grew up in a working class community. It was condemned as slums and the houses were knocked down. There were many, many things there. If you were a woman, if you were black, I remember my mum saying to me one day, she says, "Jon, the area's going to the dogs." I says, "Why, Mum?" I think I was 6 years old. She said, "The first bloody students moved into our street and it were from Leeds University." And there were many things which were not right about those communities. And anyway, you can't live on in the past. You've got to move to the future. But there were some elements of Blue Labour I thought which were interesting and worth discussion.
Yeah.
I think I would agree with Jon. Very interesting. The politics of Blue Labour, very interesting indeed. Not sure that I wholly bought into to Blue Labour at all. But being a broad church within the Labour Party, I think the what they have brought to the table was certainly worth discussion with different parts of the party. But it's not something which I wholly bought into.
Netherlord 666, presume it's not your real name, asks, "I'm a Northern youth officer and I felt for a long time that all the power in the party is in London." I mean, you're broadly right. What can be done about that? Especially now that the left might not be in control of the party anymore. So what can be done by this chap who's just a youth officer?
Look at Mr.
Maybe not a chap.
Mr. or Mrs. or Madam or Ms. or whatever,
Netherlord.
and 666. Read our document. It's got quite a lot of recommendations at the end. Here's a funny thing. I think 2/3 of the members live in the South East and in London. We wondered whether we shouldn't try to... And remember, if we're a member-led party, they will be the decisive force in any policy changes which take place. Why not think about rebalancing the membership in some way, perhaps weighting areas which return Labour MPs, because... Let's be honest, still the North and the Midlands is still the core of where the Labour vote is. But obviously that's contentious. But look, and then the second thing is maybe trying to get people into the party. It's formidable now. It's £40 a year. It's beyond people's reach to join the Labour Party. We've made a whole series of recommendations trying to correct the imbalances which clearly have arisen in recent years. And these are problems of success, by the way. 580,000 people. It's tremendous, and some really brilliant brains and people with strong ethics and social values. But we want them to understand the areas which are not represented in the party to the same extent. Let's get those people in as well.
Ian?
I think there's some simple issues we need to look at. We're delighted we've got 580,000 members. 2/3 of the members live in the South. And when you look at the statistics in terms of MPs, I think it's 117 MPs live in the North with 140,000 members. I've got it written here. And in the South, there's only 64 MPs. When I say only, fantastic. With nearly 250,000 members. So that's a huge imbalance. And with that, comes like the National Conference. We have the National Conference, 13,000 people at the conference last year. Brilliant. But the vast majority of them, obviously, because of the affiliation, the vast majority of them are from southern constituencies. Now, have a look at the demographics as well. What that really means is that at conference, the sovereign place where we make our decisions, the decisions are being made by people who, in many ways, haven't seen austerity, They haven't seen the change in terms of the gig economy. They haven't seen they haven't experienced the fact that the factory in their town or their village is closed down, causing desperation. They haven't seen the mining industry closed down. They just haven't seen that. That's not a criticism, it's a fact of life. So I think we've got to look at building a membership, not of £40. We've got to build a membership Look at all the people in the heartlands who cannot afford to be a member of the Labour Party. 40 quid is an awful lot of money for somebody on a 0-hour contract, for somebody who really isn't making ends meet, putting food on the table for themselves and their kids and clothing them correctly. So I think we've got to look at ways and means of correcting that financial and economic imbalance right across the whole of the country. And the factor is, people have got to start recognising and understanding this.
So I suppose the person who asked the question said, what can I do? First is read the report on Tribune.
Yeah.
And then second is to...
Well, we've invited people to write to us. How's that? So on
here's the call to action.
In Tribune and in the report, you'll see we've put an email address. I think we've had, quite a few dozen already, people writing in with the most fascinating ideas about how to do it, really deeply concerned about this. Get engaged. And look, we're going to take this out into the country. We're not disappearing. We're going to fight for a socialism, 21st century socialism, but which is rooted in communities, which still have got all those Labour values. They're still there. In the report, we produce lots of opinion polling which show that those communities remain deeply attracted to solidarity, to mutuality, reciprocity, enabling us, all of the values, public ownership, which are the best of Labour, still there, embedded in those communities. We are going to build, because we're not going to sit back and just complain. Whoever becomes leader, Ian and I and others are going to be out there. We ask everybody who's watching this programme, why not join us?
Right, you've answered Nick Bullich's question, which is what a socialist MP is going to do to keep Labour a democratic socialist party in the event of a Keir Starmer victory. Nick, rewind 25 seconds and you can get the beginning of John's answer. I think that's it. We've got the budget on Wednesday. Michael Walker's going to be joined by James Medway and Ash Sarkar. You've both been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
My pleasure. And to reiterate, this report is on Tribune.
Yeah.
And the article itself is called... Just Google Northern Discomfort.
You'll find it in 2
Tribune.
seconds. Yeah.
It'll come up. Yeah. If you haven't already, smash the like button.
Yeah.
And go on.
Please read it.
Please read it. And
engage.
Yeah. And you've got the email at the bottom, haven't you?
Yeah, the unity of theory and practice. That's what it is.
Somebody called you a poet after you used the thing about the tapestry and the thread and the comments. I thought it was
kind.
very, very true. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good night.